In today's video, I'm going to talk about the role that the UN plays in regulating conflict and maintaining peace, and also maintaining the global political order in terms of sovereign states. This is part of the OCR A-Level spec for power and borders, and I've highlighted the section that it comes under in 3.A. So, first of all, we need to know that the UN is a supranational institution, which means it is a level of governance above that of the sovereign state. It started out in 1945, post war, and there were originally 51 countries, but it's grown quite significantly in power, and now it is made up of 193 member states. Only 2 states are not part of it, Palestine and the Holy See. It's a very powerful organisation, and it plays a very key role in conflict. So there are different ways in which it tries to maintain security and peace, and partly this is developing good relations between nations. It also has to try and develop and uphold international law via treaties, which I'll explain in a second, and foster cooperation. So these are the kind of main aims that it's been trying to do, and it does this through a variety of strategies and actions. So I talked about international law and treaties. Well, a treaty is essentially a written international agreement in which 2 or more parties, here in this example France, India and the USA, have agreed upon. So they come up with an agreement, write it down, and then all agree to sign it. And it's when it's between 2 or more states or international organisations. For example, the EU can sign into international agreements. Just one example of this that we might have talked about before, the Paris Agreement, that was signed by 192 parties, and they all agreed to lower greenhouse gas emissions and keep temperatures below 2 degrees of warming. So to actually get a treaty, there needs to be something behind that. So treaties are based on this idea I've already talked about, on norms, these universally accepted standards of behaviour, customs and morals. And we find those norms are actually written down in the UN Charter. So the UN Charter obviously is a basis for where a lot of the treaties come out of. Once you actually sign a treaty, like Jacob Zuma is doing here, you actually are then bound by international law. Signed and ratified means that is a law. Here's an example of a treaty that was signed and how effective it was. It was called the Ottawa Treaty in 1997, and lots of the countries, all the countries in the bottom right-hand corner, they decided that to stop producing, using and stockpiling anti-personnel mines, what we would otherwise known as like a landmine. So 164 countries, parties signed it, but unfortunately there were some big countries that didn't sign it. So we could argue, how effective is it if some of the big political powers like China, Russia and the USA don't sign it? Similarly, this was something that was made effective this year, even though it was signed initially back in 2017. It was a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. You can see people were very happy there. Unfortunately, again, it was one of those treaties in which some of the biggest nuclear powers, the USA, China and Russia, didn't sign. So even though there are these treaties, some United Nations members can still refuse to sign them, and therefore they don't have to kind of abide by them. Another example of a role that the UN has that is beyond treaties is the idea of peacekeeping. So this is where we send military troops. Member states offer military personnel, and then they are sent as UN peacekeepers to military intervene into conflicts. These are conflicts we're going to have a look at in further detail and further case studies, but we can see that these blue hats are a good example of troops on the ground trying to keep the peace. However, peacekeeping and signing treaties aren't the only ways. I'm not going to talk about all the ways, but another significant way is to talk about peacebuilding. This is slightly a longer term process than peacekeeping, and essentially it incorporates quite a lot of ideas. But some of these ideas are really important and largely talk about relationships. So it can involve, as we can see at this table here, the UN helping conflicting groups repair relationships. It could be over a sovereignty challenge, it could be due to a lack of resources or conflict of resources, but getting them to talk to each other, communicate and repair that relationship. Another issue, which I'm going to talk about in a second, is reforming institutions. So maybe institutions like the legal system or police force or army that are slightly corrupt can be actually reformed with the help of UN advisors to make them better. Disarmament, which basically means, removing weapons. The idea of getting rid of kind of your military and kind of lots of the weapons that you have can actually help promote peace in the long term. Another example would be maybe to ensure that elections were fair, not corrupt, not rigged, or that human rights were actually implemented in a country to make sure everyone had a fair and equal opportunity. An example of something that the UN actually involved with, which relates to another case study we're going to look at, is they helped the Malian police force, which had some very significant issues with violence against women, especially sexual violence against women. They helped them come up with a 3-year national action plan, which you can see some of the priorities in the bottom left-hand corner. They helped them implement it, and this was an example of an institution being reformed in a long-term process by the action of the UN working with the Malian police force. One of the most obvious ways that you probably already know is humanitarian aid. Again, I'm going to use the example of Mali. We're going to talk about the conflicts and challenges of sovereignty about Mali, but the measles vaccinations after an outbreak of measles there have been given by UNICEF. So nearly 340,000 children have actually been vaccinated due to the fact that they've had an outbreak, and the UN and the UN partner, which is UNICEF, can actually give aid to them during this huge measles crisis. One of the other major roles I'm not going to talk about now, but we'll put a link to another video, is the UN Security Council. They have a really significant and probably one of the most important roles, but I'm going to talk about that in another video.